Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us in Halal in Travel Global Summit hosted by Crescent Rating. My name is Dr. Nisha, and I'm a tourism and hospitality consultant. My expertise is in providing destination and tourism consultancy for DMOs, hotels, and tourism management companies. My PhD topic was in the area of spirituality in tourism education, and I'm so privileged to share this topic on the rise of spiritual tourism in the post COVID era. And what will I be covering today? First of all, what is spiritual tourism? Because there's a little bit of a confusion in the definition of what entails spiritual tourism. Then the growth of spiritual tourism. Why are we talking about this in this conference? The drivers of spiritual tourism. It's important for all tourism stakeholders to understand this before you could design your tourism products. Spiritual tourism experiences from many parts of the world that is currently already taking place so that it gives you some creative ideas. And finally, the way forward. So is spiritual tourism the same as religious tourism? The term is often used interchangeably, and it tends to cause a lot of confusion among researchers and tourism suppliers as well. Let's look at what really is religious tourism. It is a visit or pilgrimage to sacred places or religious sites and or to participate in religious ceremonies or to fulfill your religious duties and motives. So for instance, you have trips to the Hajj and or the Umrah or for the Vatican, to the Vatican or to the Varanasi for the Hindus, and many other pilgrimages, which is very religious in nature. However, spiritual tourism is different, as in the sense that if you go on a religious trip, you may be spiritual, or if you go on a spiritual journey, you may practice some of your religious rites of faith, but it is not the same. So, what is spiritual tourism? It goes beyond the context of religion. So, even if somebody has got no faith, they can still practice spiritual tourism, or one, even with a faith, can go into a destination to be in relation to the natural environment and see the divinity in the natural ecosystem. It could be one who is looking into their mind, body, soul searching and personal meaning with a particular community or even in the natural ecosystem. The focus is number two on the individual phenomena rather than on a religion or a particular destination, like for example, Saudi Arabia and Mecca. But this is very much focused on the individual because it is a search for a purpose of life from and through travel. So the exploration of one's life to balance their mind, body, and soul, their mental, physical well-being is the intention of this particular journey. And it's a journey of an experience rather than the destination. So people will be, first of all, be interested in what is their intention, what is their motive for going on a particular trip, and then think about the choice of a destination or the services provided at a particular destination, because it is about a soul searching experience or a connection that they are going to feel between themselves and the ecosystem that they are going to be surrounded by. It becomes a voyage of discovery. So the discovery is not about the destination, but what is within one's own experience. So, who are these spiritual tourists? They are people who seek to go out of their usual destination, which is tourism, with the intention of a spiritual meaning. So they have a very clear thought as to what they are seeking on their particular experience. And that could be without any overt religious compulsion by their family or by their religion. And it could be a very sacred experience. When we say sacred, it's not about a religious sacred, but it's a very secular sacred experience in nature. So it could be sacred for somebody within themselves when they discover something, or it could be sacred when they are connected to a natural landscape and they realize the immense power of nature, for example. And it can be regardless of a religion, right, orientation. And this becomes the sole reason for that particular journey. So there has been a growth in spiritual tourism all across the world. UNWTO, for instance, approximated about a 600 over million national and international religious and spiritual voyages that had occurred as early as 2011. And in 2018, a research found an estimation of about one third of the 1.4 billion international travelers were traveling for spiritual and religious purposes. India alone has seen a market value of about 44 USD billion dollars in 2020 and a percentage growth of 10% on a year on year. So we are seeing this happening in a big wave, and that is a time for us to now leverage on the growth potential of this particular market. There has been a rise in spiritual tourism in India, like I've mentioned, and as well as all over the world, even in the western part of the world, has been a spiritual awakening. So, what has led to the increase in the spiritual tourism? Number one, there has been an increase in conscious travel. So, particularly in the post COVID world, we are going to see people who are more conscious and they're paying more attention to the ecological environment, to the communities that they are going to be staying with. They want to look at how they could support local communities. People are researching on the personal meaning of their connection to a local community or the eco environment, and they want to make a difference. So there has to be a personal meaning to their travel experiences. We are also seeing a rise in experiential travel. So it is about the experience, it's about the journey, it's about the soul searching that happens within a voyage rather than a particular destination, the architecture or the iconic infrastructures. Halal tourism, which is of course, the theme for this particular conference. We've seen the huge potential in that. And of course, the very important role played by the media. Media is also portraying the importance of yoga, for example, to people's physical and mental well-being, especially in the COVID era. There has been a lot of focus on meditation, for example, staying in ashrams or in secular retreats. And for example, if you look at the movie Eat, Pray, Love, there was a journey taken by the star of the movie when she went to India and Bali, right, in Indonesia, to seek spiritual solutions, right, to the challenges of modern life. So people are motivated by these sort of media influences. At the individual level, we are beginning to see the search for authenticity. And authenticity is not about the authentic environment alone, but the authenticity to one's own experiences. People are saying, what's authentic to me, right? What am I seeking when I go within myself? Is it real an experience, or is it something just very superficial on the outside? So people are seeking real experiences that they could feel and it could touch the soul. Also, there's a response to the upheavals of the pandemic, as we are very clearly aware of the stresses. People have been within their homes, they want to get out, so it's an anti-stress therapy. We are also beginning to see people displaying the need to not go into crowded area. They want isolation, and they want to be going through self-introspection due to the lots of losses that many people have encountered in their lives over the last 2.5 years. Also, there is a big movement, not only in the West, but also in the eastern part of the world, away from materialism and neoliberalism that we have encountered over the last few decades. So people are seeking non-material experiences. So it's not about the iconic infrastructures, but what's within these destinations that give them the non-materialistic satisfaction and or growth within themselves. And away from the stresses of the modern life in terms of work-life balance, many people are looking for spiritual experiences as a form of escapism. There's a lot of literature surrounding the need for all these individual travel trends. A couple of researchers, primarily Chia, Balhassan, and Khawaja, they came up with a very nice model, which actually depicts what are the drivers for spiritual tourism. As mentioned earlier, wellness and healing seem to be driving spiritual tourism. And it's not just about physical wellness or healing, but it's about mental, emotional, as well as spiritual healing that many people are seeking. And also, there is a sense of personal development or wanting to gain knowledge in terms of experience of alternative ways of life, also in terms of a personal quest. So that's a need for transcendence, to go beyond an ordinary way of life, to understand things which are larger than us, and to connect with a the divine. And it could be divine in terms of a god, or divinity in terms of what is the manifestation of the universe. And also, people are looking at inward journeying rather than outward journeying. And that's what today the luxury of travel is, the luxury of going within yourself into a self introspection or into a learning journey. So, this seems to be very critical drivers of spiritual tourism in the current era. So, Norman 2012 actually looked at spiritual tourism along the categories of these. Spiritual tourism as healing. So, as mentioned, wellness, going into retreats, going into ashrams, for example, are forms of spiritual tourism as healing. Spiritual tourism as experiments. People want to seek alternative way of life experiences. So, as the Western world, they want to look at Eastern philosophy. They want to look at what is like living like a monk, or yogic experiences, and what do people go through, the philosophy of the Eastern way of life. Spiritual tourism as a quest where people are searching for knowledge. So whether it's an Islamic knowledge and heritage of Islamic scientists, for example, who live in Uzbekistan, or the spiritual leaders and gurus, and what they are teaching. For instance, the Satgurus, for example, have got a very huge following. Spiritual tourism as a retreat and escape from your day-to-day life. So you see a lot of people going into ecotourism destination. It's not just a physical healing, but about what healing they could bring to the eco environment. So whether it's adoption of animals in retreats, or whether it is going to health spas, that is a retreat away from the modernity. And spiritual tourism as a collective. Today we're going to see, it's like what we saw at the Burning Man, for example, where people feel that it's a very spiritual experience as a collective. It's a liminal feeling of being away from everyone with like-minded people. So it could be a secular pilgrimage that people go together, is another form of spiritual tourism. So I gave you some examples of spiritual tourism that we have witnessing in other parts of the Rishikesh is very well known for spiritual tourism in India, where people go in there to learn. Lots of people from the Western world go in there to understand the Eastern religious philosophy. They stay at the ashram, they go into a yoga and meditation course, and many of it has got no religious connotation whatsoever. Listen to spiritual gurus, like I mentioned, people like Sadhguru, for instance, or Osho's way of living, and they want to listen to masters. The Camino de Santiago, for example, in Spain, is another example of just a walk. It's just a spiritual walk that people engage in as a personal challenge. The challenge of walking through after one goes through a major trauma in their life, for instance. They just walk alone. They want a me time to think it through, to quieten their mind, and just walk. And becomes a very deep experience, which shifts their own soul search. And that's been catching up a lot. As you can see, in 2021, it had the highest number of pilgrims, even compared to the pre-pandemic world. This is a company called the World Weavers. It's a very interesting tour. They go into living like a monk into Tibet and understanding what it is like in terms of monkhood. They also go into the Rastafarism, being a Rastafarian in Ethiopia, for example, or even to live like a Muslim in Istanbul. So devoid of all religious undertones. It's about understanding Sufism, for instance, the myths of Rumi, for example, without the need for conversion. So they pray, they understand what it is like to fast, and understand the mysticism behind Rumi. The Abraham Path, this is another very amazing initiative by the Harvard professors and a rabbi, and they bring people on a walk on the Abraham's journey, or Abrahamic pathways. And it's really about walk, meet, and exchange. It's about understanding that regardless of what faith that we are from, there is something called humanity. So people come together, they learn from each other, they exchange information and feel the compassion and love in humanity, so that it removes all kinds of divisiveness. This is another one in India, which is an eco-village that people look at sustainability, not only of the environment, but inner sustainability as well. So there's a lot of inward journey that happens in here, in addition to looking at the eco-environment, the animals, as well as experiential learning. Laos, for example, is all about walking down the streets, looking at the saffron robbed monks on their daily alms collection, understanding about the temples and the culture. And this is a UNESCO site, and looking at the the wooden styled building, the French colonial culture, but it's really about a learning of the spirituality that surrounds this particular area. So, giving you some examples of Uzbekistan, it's got amazing cultures of the Islamic traditions. We've also seen religious leaders and many of them who are scientists buried in here. There is a need for people to understand what has happened in Uzbekistan. It's also a destination where we can hear prayers, but the convening of Muslims, Christians, and Jews who come in there, for us to realize that it's not about the divisiveness of different religion, but it's about how people convene for the love of humanity. So there are plenty of retreats. How do you bring that personal connection to travelers when they arrive at Uzbekistan, for example? The Haji Ali Dargah, for example, in India, where it's all about Sufism, about the Qawwali, and there are many spiritual retreats surrounding this place. And when you come into the shoreline, for people to understand the mosque is sitting on the shoreline and where the ocean is, for them to understand the essence of his or own being when they are at this particular place, listening to the music, listening to the traditions and the culture and the spiritual energy that is found in the collective voices which are in there. And Morocco, which is very, very close to my heart, is again another amazing destination which has got masjids and zawiyas and universities. And like Fez, for example, is a historic center and it's got the first Islamic university. But in addition to that, one is able to see the Sahara, for example, to understand the vastness that you see at the Sahara, and to be a reminder that infiniteness of the divine and the magnificence of the creator can be felt in there. And that can be a very, very strong emotional moment if the tourism intermediaries are able to bring that awareness in people. And once people go into even the mountainous areas in Morocco, I think that the magnitude of the vastness of the mountain, for instance, is able to bring us to understand the greatness of Allah, for example. And we are able to see the divinity in the ecosystem. But how do we bring that into a personal journey? How do we bring that as a personal meaning to the travelers who are going to be there is the challenge that we face in terms of the spiritual experiences. So the way forward, I think tourism is going to grow. Spiritual tourism is definitely going to grow. We are beginning to see tourism as a social force today more than anything else to bring humanity out of every one of us when we travel. We are beginning to see, especially among the millennials, that they are soul searching escapades that they're looking for in terms of personal grounding. And also there is a trend in many travelers, especially in the post-COVID world, to go off the beaten travel tracks. So if we are going to leverage on spiritual tourism, it's important for us to understand first the traveler, what they are seeking, the categories of spiritual tourism, as I mentioned earlier. It is not about the destination. Start with the traveler first and understand what is the motivation that drives them for spiritual tourism. Secondly, work very closely with the local authorities and cultural leaders to bring that essence of spirituality. It's not about the religion, but the spiritual dimension that is found in this destination. And finally, once we understand this too, then how do we connect the environment with the traveler? There has to be a sense of interconnectedness. There must be a relatedness between them and the environment so that it becomes a journey and a voyage within themselves. And there must be a personal meaning and a transcendence that is higher than what we see in terms of the materialistic world if we are going to look at the spiritual journey of these travelers. So I would like to round up by saying that that is going to be a very, very huge market. The test is for us to understand and leverage on this huge market potential. And every single destination has got a spiritual domain, a spiritual resources in there. It is our challenge as well as our opportunity to look at how we could bring that out of every single destination to appeal to the spiritual traveler. With that, thank you so much. Let's build back better. Thank you for joining this session at the Halal in Travel Global Summit. And do check out all the other interesting sessions. I wish you all the best and thank you very much.